Welcome to Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. Today's conversation promises to be an insightful one with a remarkable guest. Whether you're joining us for the first time or you're a regular listener, we're so glad you're here. Our goal is to bring you closer to the innovative leaders and thinkers shaping our future. And today, I'm thrilled to welcome Colonel Jeremy Gwinn. Today's guest brings together the rare combination of frontline combat experience, Pentagon-level strategic leadership, and academic expertise in national security, defense, and technology. Colonel Gwinn is an Army infantry officer and faculty member at the Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy at the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. There, he helps educate the next generation of senior military and civilian leaders on the economics of national security and defense industrial base issues. Before joining the faculty, Jeremy served as Chief of Staff for Strategic Operations at Headquarters, Department of the Army G357, where he was the principal military advisor to the Director of Strategic Operations on issues spanning cyber, space, electromagnetic warfare, and data, some of the most consequential areas shaping modern conflict. Over the course of his career, he has led a variety of infantry formations from platoon through battalion level, advised foreign security forces, deployed multiple times to Afghanistan and Iraq, and completed 2 tours on the Army staff in the Pentagon. In other words, he has operated at every level of war: tactical, operational, and strategic. Colonel Gwinn is also an advanced strategic planning and policy fellow and earned his PhD in international relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. His doctoral research examined U.S. national security policy and unconventional warfare operations after 9/11. He's taught at the Fletcher School at Tufts, Harvard, and West Point, and currently serves as adjunct lecturer at Johns Hopkins, where he recently developed a new course called Technology in War. In addition to his academic work, Jeremy has worked with startups in the defense technology space, advising them on defense requirements and how best to navigate defense acquisitions landscape. His writing has appeared in Parameters, Military Review, Small Wars Journal, and War on the Rocks, contributing to some of the most important debates in contemporary defense policy. We're excited to explore his insights on strategy and defense technology and what it really takes to align policy, resources, and military power in an era of strategic competition. Well, welcome to Tipping Spears, Colonel Gwinn.
Thank you, Hannah. Appreciate that kind introduction. It sounds a lot more coherent, kind of hearing it back than it ever felt at the time. So I appreciate that. Really happy to be here, and it's an honor.
Well, can you start us off today by telling us where your story begins?
Absolutely. So I was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army in 1998. So it really was the sort of Cold War hangover Army. And it really sort of felt like an Army searching for its purpose. You know, the Cold War was over. There was no longer a major geopolitical threat, at least that we perceived. And the biggest thing going on was peacekeeping operations and peace enforcement in the Balkans. Not exactly what I was expecting as a new infantry officer, fresh out of Ranger School, but, it's what the nation needed the Army and its military to do at the time. So I really thought that that's what the next few decades would look like. Then 9/11 happened very shortly after, and we shifted overnight to counterterrorism, counterinsurgency focus for the next decade and a half. And you hinted at this in the intro, but it wasn't until I arrived at my last Pentagon assignment that I was really thrown into the deep end of defense technology, where I'm at right now.
Yeah, well, what an exciting space to be in 2026.
It is.
So what first sparked your interest, in this sector?
Well, so it was that time in the Army G357 just a few years ago, with that portfolio that included, like you mentioned in the intro, EW, space, cyber, data, kind of all things C5ISR. I'm sure we'll talk more on this here as we go along, but you simply can't sit in those meetings for very long without being hit by how critical these technologies will be in the next conflict. And I think I only really understood that fully in that last assignment.
Was there a particular event or person that served as a catalyst for your career?
Sure, that's a great question. So I and I've thought about this a lot, like why, especially as I'm, nearing 3 decades in uniform, like why did I do this? Or how did I get here? I don't come from a military family at all, but I think I was just drawn to the military and service through my time as a Boy Scout, honestly, which I'm forever grateful for. And an increasingly large portion of those who join the military now have a parent who served or some other close family member. So it's really become somewhat of a family business, which was not the case in my situation. And I don't think that's in and of itself a bad thing that you have these sort of legacy military families, but I do wish that there were more sources of inspiration to serve, such as I had for more Americans, maybe without that family lineage of service. I think it would lead to a larger cross section of Americans in uniform, and I think that would be healthy.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think when folks, come from military families, they have that point of contact, that reference,
Mhm.
that person you can ask, you know, hey, what's MEPS? What's this recruiter trying to get me to
Yeah.
sign? What's going on? But, we forget if folks don't have that connection. You make a great point about how, military service has, it's been very much a family business and finding
Mhm.
ways to connect with, future warfighters who may not have that immediate family connection is so important.
Yeah, exactly. I think many just kind of don't ever think about it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So every journey has its hurdles. What were some of the biggest obstacles that you faced in your career, and how did you overcome them?
So another great question. I think really, I would love to give an answer about like some experience I had in combat or something like that, but I think the answer would really be like that mindset shift going from tactical assignments to working in the Pentagon as in my first Pentagon assignment as a major. Um, so, we're in this culture where I think we tend to avoid these sort of enterprise level Pentagon assignments in order to stay, as we're constantly being told, like you got to stay muddy boots, Army, stay muddy boots, and I'm sure there are like analogs in the other services as well. Um, but these assignments really are invaluable, even for mid-level officers, like again, like myself as a young major, because I think really only in these assignments where you truly like learn how the enterprise, how your institution functions, so you can go back out there to the tactical or operational level, and I think be that much more effective.
Yeah, you really get kind of a peek behind the curtain on
Mhm.
how the
You
sauce is made.
you really do.
So you've had a career that spans infantry leadership, combat deployments, the Pentagon, and now academia. What were the pivotal points that shaped that, truly incredible path?
Um, I I think pivotal points. I think doing as a captain. I think doing counterinsurgency for year after year in Iraq and Afghanistan, and my first deployment to Afghanistan. My first combat deployment was Afghanistan, 2003, 2004, and then went to Iraq in 05, 06, both times as a company command rifle company commander in the 10th Mountain Division. And I think being constantly confronted by that gap between what military action can achieve and what political objectives require, right? And I think it really makes the like Clausewitzian idea of war as a political act kind of come home in a very, very visceral way, right? And those experiences gave me a lot of questions that I just couldn't answer. So like why does one thing work and something else doesn't? Why does this thing work in one area, and the same thing doesn't work in another area, right? And I had like I think myself and all my contemporaries at the time, I was reading David Galula and T.E. Lawrence, and trying to like learn those historical lessons from 50 or 60 years ago. But I think I realized through this experience that I still didn't have the intellectual tools to answer these questions, and that really started me on an intellectual and academic journey, that led to, after that second deployment as a kind of after company command, going to teach in the social sciences department at West Point. I taught after grad school, then going to West Point to teach for a few years, teaching economics there, in the social department, and then eventually, post battalion command, much more recently, eventually pursuing a PhD in international relations as an like you mentioned in the intro, as an ASP3 fellow, or it's this advanced strategic planning and policy program, this fellowship program that the Army has through SAMS out of Fort Leavenworth. And it was these experiences. It was these experiences then, I think, kind of coming home with my time most recently in Army G357, where we focused a lot on the changing character of war and the role of technology, and great power competition, that probably served as sort of that final pivot to where I'm at now.
I love how, the questions that what they're coming to mind as you're going through these experiences really shaped kind of your future. I think all too often
Mm-hmm.
people encounter uncertainty and they're like, okay, I'm not sure what's going on here. And they tend to withdraw, and you really engaged. And, the entire sector is better for folks like you for getting involved. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Hannah. I mean, I think, not just myself, I think a lot of officers, you really, um, after those sort of big assignments, command, or sort of these formative experiences, whether it's a deployment or what have you, it's a good opportunity to like really stop and take stock and reflect on that experience, and even maybe do some professional writing, which really helps you like distill your thoughts and sort of raise more questions. I always found that very valuable, and I think that really like led a lot to where I'm at now.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little more kind of what your major takeaways, from those experiences were, and like how we should think about, technology and the changing character of war?
Sure. So changing character of war and technology. I think the first takeaway is that while technology will be critical, like we've talked about, we can't become overly fixated on the technology, right? The political nature of war is unchanging, even though the character of war is constantly changing, right? The political nature of war is unchanging. Going back to that, it's funny in the classroom too, particularly in the course that I teach at Johns Hopkins. I think like every class, I can't help but always go back to Clausewitz, right? The unchanging political nature of war, and so it'll always, and so no different during this podcast. You're welcome. But it'll always be about holding at risk what the adversary values, and so despite the proliferation of uncrewed systems and machine learning, algorithm driven warfare, war will become more bloody, not less, just because the technology just gives us more tools, right? And of course, we see this right now. We've seen this in Ukraine for the last few years, right? This juxtaposition of violent World War One style trench warfare, heavy use of artillery, along with many thousands of drones, and increasing contestation of the electromagnetic spectrum for sensing, kinetic targeting, electronic attack, right? All very high tech areas that, have only existed recently. But the point is, all the drones in the world are useless if you can't tie their achievement to, or can't tie their employment to achievement of a political objective. And the second major takeaway, through that experience has to do with what what I sometimes call like the new economics of war, which is something that we didn't have to worry about for many years. This is the idea that even if you have the best technology in the world and you win every engagement or battle, if you do so at an unacceptable economic cost or your industrial base, your defense industrial base just can't support it, then you can still lose strategically.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the new economics of war. Can you tell us, a little more about, the new economics of war fighting, how it's playing out, just kind of a little more insight there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with a little history, actually, kind of like how we got where we're at now. So in during World War II, the United States produced in just a few years about 50,000 Sherman tanks, right, to face off mainly for the war in Europe against Germany, and these were designed to produce very quickly. They were cheaper and technologically inferior to the German Panzers, right? But they were good enough. The technology was good enough, even though they were an inferior tank, and ultimately like mass and just volume. We had a lot more of them than the Germans had Panzers, right? So mass won out over high technology, and it's a case where I think like that the Stalin quote Stalin may or may not have actually said it, but often attributed to Stalin, right? That quantity has a quality all its own. I think is applies right in this case, and we find ourselves in Vietnam, a few decades later, um, and during Operation Rolling Thunder, which was the U.S. strategic bombing campaign of the North, right? A lot of this campaign was targeting supply lines, that sort of thing. And and there was this one particular bridge called the Than Hoa Bridge, or called the Dragon's Jaw by some. The United States failed in over 870 sorties to destroy this bridge that was like part of a key supply line for the North. And this was using the technology, the dominant technology at the time, which was like dumb bombs, unguided munitions, right? But a few years later, early in Operation Linebacker, um, with the same target, the United States tried using a new technology at the time that had just sort of come out of the labs, right? This was new laser and TV guided bombs, and they destroyed the bridge in just a few sorties, right? With these new sort of very early stage guided munitions. This was the start of the precision warfare revolution that sort of put the United States on a path for the next few decades, right? Um, so we realized after Vietnam that we had to solve the problem of the central sort of operational problem of breaking a massive Soviet assault in Europe, and we looked at like munitions expenditures in the Yom Kippur War, right, and sort of took a lot of lessons away from that, and we realized that we could only do it with precision because we couldn't beat the Soviets with mass, right, with numbers, and so that put us on this path for a few decades that really came of age in the 1991 Gulf War, sort of U.S. precision dominance on display for the world to see on CNN. And by that point, we had become a military highly reliant on very expensive, very exquisite weapons that were better than any other military had in the world. This was the same military that we took to Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11, and it was of course a different threat, right? Counterinsurgency fight. But it was still the military that we had, right? The military that we went to war with, and so we ended up using the $200,000 Hellfire missile, fired from a multi-million-dollar platform against the like proverbial poor Taliban and a Toyota pickup truck, and but this was okay. Nobody really worried about it because the volume of engagements was so low in counterinsurgency. This was not protracted sort of sort of protracted combat against a high-end threat. And so the economics really didn't matter, right? Again, because of this low volume of engagements. Then we get into more recently into Ukraine, or supporting Ukraine against Russia, maintaining freedom of navigation in the Red Sea in recent years, and the United States and allies then sort of learn that we can't indefinitely fire SM-2s, SM-6s, $2 million Patriot interceptors to shoot down a $100,000 cheap ballistic missile or a $30,000 drone, right? The math, or as this term that applies, the cost exchange ratio, it's catastrophically unfavorable, and it's not sustainable over time, both from an economic perspective and an industrial capacity perspective, right, to replenish munitions, particularly if you're preparing for a potential protracted conflict in the Western Pacific. This is a problem. So, but fortunately, though, I think there are a lot of reasons to be optimistic. I am optimistic that we have learned these lessons, or we are learning these lessons, and we're taking steps in the right direction. And crucially, the United States military, we're working much more closely with U.S. tech companies to solve these problems right now, and make the economics a lot more favorable.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's such a great overview. I think it's something that a lot of folks just aren't tracking on, but you outlined it in a way that makes a lot of economic sense. So, what role do you think, or what role should or does the U.S. tech sector play in all of this?
It's I guess in a word, it's critical.
Mhm.
Compared to, say, like 10 years ago, just as recently as that, we're seeing a tremendous desire on the part of both existing tech companies and new startups, new non-traditional defense companies to work with the DoW, work with the U.S. military, and the department's created a lot of over that time, kind of over the last 10 years or so, created a lot of inroads for that to happen through, along with the help of Congress, right? Other transaction authorities, non-traditional acquisition pathways, and other initiatives that we see more recently, such as acquisition reform, warfighter acquisition reform, that was announced last fall. The recent executive order on unleashing American drone dominance, right? All of these things have the goal of sort of making it easier to work with the Department of Defense, achieving not just mass, but precise, affordable mass, right? Because crucially, the technology has arrived at a point where there's the trade-off between cost and precision is no longer quite as clear or as stark as it once was. Like a good enough level of precision has really become pretty cheap, pretty affordable. But like a little bit more history, because you asked about the role the U.S. tech sector is playing. Um, so the cooperation that we're seeing between Silicon Valley and the Pentagon, it's not new at all. So contrary to popular belief, the Valley did not rise up as a result of the consumer tech revolution, right? Like decades ago. Think personal computing, mobile, social media, so forth, food delivery, ride sharing. But it was really during World War II. The War Department at the time established relationships with Stanford, MIT, and other universities to develop radar. That was kind of the big one, but other critical technologies as well that were needed in the war. And it was through these relationships that early tech leaders, like Fairchild Semiconductor and others, were founded in Silicon Valley. And so the Valley would not exist in its current form without the defense establishment. But this eventually became eclipsed by the consumer tech revolution, and it sort of became a distant memory through the 70s and 80s. So we saw this disconnect then grew between the military and the Valley, and this disconnect came to a head really with Project Maven about 10 years ago.
Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So Project Maven was a DoD initiative to use machine learning to help analyze drone surveillance footage, really to automate the process of analyzing imagery that human analysts were just drowning in. This was, think we were still in Afghanistan at the time. We had this exponential proliferation of sensors, full motion video, thousands and thousands of hours that human analysts couldn't possibly analyze anymore. And so Google won part of this contract again to apply machine learning to this problem. But when their employees found out about it, around 2017, 2018, there was a revolt, right? Hundreds signed open letters opposing it. Some quit because of this idea or the realization that their work could be used in targeting, could be used to potentially take human life, right? And so Google ultimately declined to renew. And at the time, it seemed like it was like this sign of an unbridgeable divide between the Valley and the U.S. military. But then in the intervening years, something shifted, right? I think owing to the Ukraine war, I think sort of the growing geopolitical reality of competing with a techno-authoritarian state in China, I think the Valley sort of realized what side it wanted to be on, and so there was a culture shift, and now they actively seek out defense work. These are still companies that are seeking to make a profit, right? I mean, make no mistake about that. But I think the willingness to work with the military has come back because they do see a business opportunity, but I think there's also this geopolitical imperative that they see as well. And the department is actively trying to make that easier and more attractive because it's a source of innovation that we realize now. I think we can't ignore, and we just can't do without it.
So does this mean that there is no more role for, traditional defense primes?
Thank you for asking that question. It's a pet, not at all is the short answer. This is a pet peeve of mine. It's this idea that like all we'll need in the next war is a bunch of or for future conflicts is a bunch of like low cost unmanned drones. No, like we'll still need fifth and sixth generation fighters, high precision, high end precision missiles. Yes, probably tanks too, and other exquisite capabilities that the primes, right, have a long history of delivering and really doing it, better than producing the best in the world. Now they may need to do it faster and at lower costs, sure, but the point is that we still need a mix of these higher end and lower end capabilities, right? Not just for economic reasons alone, but that's a huge part of it.
I know when we spoke earlier, you mentioned this idea of reverse innovation. Can you explain, what it is and how that applies to defense?
Sure. So reverse innovation, it's not my idea. I can't take credit for it. It's a concept from a business school book, actually, by two professors at Tuck at Dartmouth. And that's the name of their book, by the way, Reverse Innovation. Recommend everyone check it out. So conventional wisdom says that for many years, says that you develop the best products in the United States, Europe, Japan, right, the rich world, and you sell it to wealthy customers there first. And then maybe eventually you think about exporting a version to emerging markets, right? So reverse innovation like flips that. And so I'll use an example. The canonical example probably is GE Healthcare, right? And it's one of the example cases in the book. GE had been making high-end, very expensive ECG machines and other sort of medical imaging machines for the rich world for many years, and it was the gold standard. And they realized that there was a potential market in India for these, but but not for not for what they had been making, right? And so rather than just trying to, kind of sell an export version in India, they went there at first and they really examined like what the needs were in rural India, and what clinics were using there at the time, and they developed a new version, right, for the Indian local market based on local needs. And but it turned out, and it was successful in India, but actually they found that that same version that they developed for the Indian market was actually had a market in the United States too, right? So a lot of U.S. first responders wanted it, rural clinics in the United States, they wanted that product too, right? It wasn't just so that innovation that really came, it was from GE, but it really came from India. Flowed back to the United States. And another good example of an Indian company, right, is Mahindra Tractor Company, developed a small, cheap, but a pretty good tractor for Indian farmers that Indian farmers could afford, but it actually ended up competing really effectively in the American like small farm market. So these are the examples from the book. We can apply the same idea to defense, and I think the example that we can't ignore right now, and we've seen a lot of in the news, is the Lucas, the low cost uncrewed combat attack system drone, which or really like one way attack munition more accurately. So the United States, we reverse engineered essentially an Iranian Shahed 136 drone. This cheap thing built out of foam, plywood, and a moped engine, and it only costs about $30,000. So a company, U.S. company called Spectre Works, designed and deployed it in about 18 months, and we're now using it in the Middle East. And as I think the CENTCOM commander said it well. I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he said, like, we captured it, pulled the guts out, put a Made in America sticker on it, and shot it back at the Iranians, right? So I think one final thing on this. So before we get too excited, let's acknowledge the vast disparity in capabilities, right, between a high-end American UAS and a Shahed, right? It's more accurate to call, like I said, the Shahed is more of a one-way attack munition, than to put it in the drone category, because there are important differences in capability, right? But the fact remains that the Lucas adds something valuable and at very, very low cost to our mix of capabilities. And so we need to do more reverse innovation like this, right? Learning from smaller powers, including adversaries, that have adapted sometimes because of their limited resources. They've adapted in really clever ways out of necessity. And of course, we're also seeing this with Ukraine, right? And what we can learn from their homegrown innovation as well during this war.
So today you teach at the National Defense University in Johns Hopkins. Can you share a little bit about the mission of the Eisenhower School at NDU and how y'all work to prepare military and government leaders to work more effectively with industry?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to. So the Eisenhower School, or the Eisenhower School for National Security and Resource Strategy, which is a mouthful. So it was founded originally as the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, but the name changed a decade or two ago. It was founded in the years after World War One, right? In I believe 1924, because that war, right, World War One revealed these massive shortcomings in how the military worked with industry, right? Military officers just like didn't understand how industry worked, and so, but however, like the military needed industry to produce all the materiel and weapons and everything that we needed to prosecute that war. But we were just like ineffective at working with industry, and so because of that problem, the school was founded. And so the mission really is in addition to teaching the traditional sort of war college, it's a senior service college, right? In addition to teaching the sort of traditional war college subjects, war fighting, military strategy, and the like, the mission is to teach senior military officers, and not just military, but government civilians as well, about the economics of national security, understand how industry functions, which includes a lot of direct engagement with industry leaders, and defense companies, tech companies, that sort of thing. And so the idea is like to help the students, these sort of emerging senior leaders in defense, to help them understand the incentives that drive industry, how industry makes decisions, ultimately, so that rather than getting frustrated, like we can shape policies that get what we need right out of industry, ultimately to further national security.
It's so fascinating. What an important mission. I was unaware that it was founded right after World War One. So that's
Yeah,
that's really
we're
enlightening.
actually the oldest. We're actually the oldest, even older than the National War College, right?
Wow.
So yeah,
Well, thank
we're
you.
proud to. Not that we
Yeah.
like to compare ourselves.
Well, thank you for the factoid. I will I will impress my colleagues with this with military history tidbits. So, Colonel Gwynn, do you have any final thoughts or words of advice for the audience today?
Sure. I think kind of back to like my personal journey, I guess, that got me here where I am now. And I know you have a lot of listeners who are junior military officers. So kind of speaking to them now, my career path should be evidence that like you can't map out your career or your life in your 20s or even your 30s, right? Life and the world are just too unpredictable. But I think like what served me well is just um, looking for opportunities, right, that seem interesting, that seem to align with what you value, and take them. And I think that's like the biggest thing that I've learned from this journey. And I think it's worked out well for me. I think it's just kind of good advice for life and people starting off their career.
Wise words. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. I know your contributions to our nation have impacted so many, and for that, we're very grateful.
Thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Tipping Spears with Hannah Becker. I hope this conversation has sparked new ideas and challenged the way you think about the future. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll catch you next time with another exciting guest.